my background is journalism, and I feel like it is a lost art form in the sense that it is the one space that society needs to uncover things that are happening. And we have been corporatized to the point and algorithmed into following the bouncing ball instead of doing the work. So I just want to praise that you're doing the work, you're uncovering, you're doing what journalists should do, which is going out, find those stories that nobody's talking about and making sure that we're aware. This is a racist housing market, period, full stop. It's not our imagination. And you gave us the receipt. So tell us about the story that led to this series.
This is a crazy story right here. It's one of those stories when you start initially hearing all the facts of it, you say, wait a minute, I must be missing something, because if everything that you're telling me lines up right, this is absolutely outrageous, it's wrong, and we got to shed some light on it. So I was working on a series of reports for Black History Month. And one of the stories I was working on was looking at home ownership disparities between Black Americans and white Americans. As many of your listeners know, in the San Francisco Bay Area and California as a whole, truly, the housing market is grueling. The homes are way overpriced. They stay on the market for a couple of days and they get snatched up. And there are many things that stop Black homeowners from being able to purchase homes. One of them being the high amount of student loan debt that our Black folks tend to carry, because we are less likely to get those scholarships. We don't come from intergenerational wealth where mommy and daddy can just pay for college. We are doing it ourselves, along with a host of other issues. And so I'm working on this story, again, looking at the Black home ownership rate in the Bay Area. And then I remembered this little blip that was in one of the local papers. And I'm going to say this too, Karen, like you started off the conversation. Journalism is important, but our local newspapers, I mean, they're the backbones. They are really the backbones of this industry, because they are at the community meetings, the board meetings, the things that we can't always get to as a television station, keeping people honest and keeping us even informed.
So shout out that local outlet.
Absolutely. The Marin IJ, they are the folks who were starting to work on a story. And this was just about discrimination that's happening in Marin County, California, which is the most segregated county in all of California. And there was this little blip from a community activist, Paul Austin, who said, and yes, by the way, as an example of discrimination that's happening in Marin County, my home was appraised for $500,000 less because of the color of our skin. And I remembered that story and I said, I have to reach out to him to get the full story on this one. And I did. And that's when they started coming with the receipts and showed me the appraisals that happened. First one, where they got the home appraised for $989,000. And I know a lot of your listeners are thinking, $1 million house? Is this a mansion? But in California, no, it's a nice home. But by no stretch of the imagination is this a mega mansion. And so they were stunned that the home was appraised for only $100,000 more than what they purchased it for, after they put in $400,000 worth of work in the home. They added an entire new level. They updated the kitchen, all of the bedrooms. It looks gorgeous now. And then they said, this isn't right. This can't be right. They fought and fought and fought to get a second appraisal, which is very tough to do. And I can explain that a little bit as well. But they heard about another couple who had essentially done the same thing. They staged the home. They completely stripped down all of the pictures, all of their artwork that may have been a nod of who lives in the home, and the Black folks live there. And they actually had one of their good friends, who happens to be a white woman, stand in for them for the appraisal. And when they got that appraisal back, it appraised for $500,000 more. $500,000 more because of the color of the skin of the homeowner. And that blew my mind, and it blew so many people's mind, and that's why it went viral. But more than that, Karen, what happened is I just started getting hit up by so many people all across the country, many people in the Bay Area too, saying, this has happened to me. Perhaps not to the degree that it happened to that family. It wasn't a $500,000 difference, but I felt like my home was undervalued because we are Black or Latinx, or we live in a particular neighborhood, and they didn't know what to do. They didn't see the playbook of let me take down all the pictures and the artwork.
But even that, Julian, the work that it requires for you to de-Black, to remove your identity, that white folk don't have to do. Right. Exactly. So like that, I have to go through all of this and maybe spend a little money, extra money, time, energy to de-blackify my home, somebody else can just sell their home and not have to do all of that. It's ridiculous. Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that is a great point. And what I'm hearing from families is we are upset. We're pissed off that we have to do this in the first place. But if that's what we have to do to play the game, because we know so much of this is playing the game, if that's what I have to do to get a fair shake, I'm willing to do it. But the reality is we need to change systemically how homes are praised and valued, how neighborhoods are valued, how that intrinsically affects all of the public necessities that we pay into with our taxes that are then devalued because of the devalued homes, so our communities can get a fair shake.
We're talking with Julian Glover, and he's at ABC 7 News in the Bay Area in California, local reporter, but this might be an international issue as it relates to us. 866-801-8255 is the number. If you guys have a story, we're here for it. And you can follow Julian at Julian Glover TV on the Twitters, or Julian G ABC 7 as well. That's his other handle. Where are you from?
I'm from DC.
Okay. All right. DC. Okay. And so how did you get into this? Was this when we talk about beats, is this one of your jams, or you fell into this beat and you made the most of it?
It's always one of those things that we, especially as Black journalists of color, I know, are in newsrooms and we're pushing for these stories to be told. And we aren't always given the space, the opportunity to be able to tell the stories. And I really sum it up to three things: the perceived interest in the market. So, news managers might say, well, maybe that's not the most important story of the day. That's not going to lead the 5 o'clock news. One of the other things is person power. It's no secret that the news industry, and I know Karen, from your background, we've been hit by cuts, and they flip and reverse your role and the tasks and responsibilities that are expected of you. And then the last thing is the time and effort. These stories aren't quick turns. You can't just jump up and get off the 10 a.m. call and then have this on the air for the 4 p.m. news. This takes time to be able to work these stories and tell these complex stories that I think our audience is truly demanding of us. And so when this opportunity presented itself to be able to do this type of work full time, head on, day in and day out, it was an incredible opportunity. And I do just want to point out that it's not just me. I'm a part of, like you mentioned at the top of the show, ABC 7 is owned by Disney. We have 7 other owned and operated stations all across the country, from Los Angeles to New York to Philly to Chicago, Houston, Raleigh. I'm forgetting somebody right now. There was one more. It'll come to me in a second. But we're all a part of this race and culture reporting team, where we have reporters at each of our stations embedded. And we are leading the charge in covering this area of race, culture, social justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But it's also the responsibility, a collective responsibility of the entire newsroom to make sure that we have a vested interest in telling these stories, because this is the stuff that really matters.
Well, it matters because most of us live in neighborhoods where we don't see it play out until it plays out. You can suspect, that my zip code means I'm paying more for car insurance, that my zip code means that I'm paying more in taxes for fewer resources, that my schools aren't going to be as good, even though I am paying more in taxes than my zip code next door to me, and it has nothing to do with crime, because here's the other thing they don't tell you, because I know I have several property manager people in my sphere. A lot of these so-called white zip codes don't report their crimes because they understand, or they play with the numbers because they understand what that looks like for real estate value, for how, for the education system and all of that. So you can have a zip code like in New Jersey, Hoboken, where they could have a lot of, crime during a weekend, drunken folk, and it never gets reported because it's not good for business. And then we talk about Detroit and Chicago and Newark, when the most dangerous place in America is in Florida. But they don't talk about that, right? Because it's not sexy. And so we have to start to take control of our narrative. We have to also start to tell the truth. And we need journalists like you to go out and tell these stories, to put the pressure on the industries and the system to do something different.
I 100% agree. And I can say that, folks are taking notice of these stories on appraisal discrimination. There are some discussions that are happening within HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development. I know the California legislature is currently working on potential legislative fixes to appraisal discrimination and looking at how we can fix loopholes that currently exist. The other thing is that the appraisal industry, it's no secret, is predominantly male and predominantly white. So there are new initiatives that are coming from this to increase the number, first and foremost, of women in the appraisal industry, and of course, people of color, Black folks, Latinx folks, Asian American folks in the appraisal industry. So there is less room for this inherent conscious or unconscious bias that folks can bring. Uh-oh.
Let me pause you though, Julian, because the problem with systemic racism is that it affects all of us. I had a situation where I had a Black woman in the same space appraised. I had two properties. One was appraised by a white man who I followed him through, and I said, do not give me the Black person appraisal. I said that to him. You know what this is worth. I know what this is worth. You better not come back with the Black person's appraisal. And he did not. I had a Black woman show up to the same building, another property, which was actually even nicer than the other one. And she came in $23,000 less than what the white man appraised my place for, because we also sometimes have anti-Black bias. And I didn't feel like I had to give her the don't give me the Black person appraisal speech. And damn if she didn't come in with, with a lower expectation for me, And so even just having a Black face in the space is not necessarily the solution. Everybody has to be aware, and it's unconscious a lot of times, which is why I had to be vocal. I wasn't going to leave it up to this man to come in and tell me what this place was. I had to let him know I'm watching you. And it put him on notice, because I don't think people want to be racist. I don't think there's some people, but I think it's like maybe 2%. I think it's just baked into the system because of systemic racism. So they're coming in with these biases that they're not even aware of. So you have to sometimes put your thumb on the scale and say, hey, you may not recognize it, but it's in you. Don't give me that Black person appraisal. And he didn't.
The other thing that I would point out, because you brought up an excellent point right there, Karen, that it is baked into the system in more ways than one. Like you mentioned with the unconscious, conscious biases that someone might be carrying into a situation. But the other way that it's baked into the system is through everything that we know about the historic racist policies of redlining and how we were contained to certain neighborhoods or excluded from other neighborhoods. And if you were just using comps, so comparable home sales in a particular neighborhood, and you're keeping this radius real tight, and predominantly Black and Latino people live here, it's continuously going to get recycled in the appraisal and the evaluation of your property. So that's why we have to come up with big, bold solutions to untangle all of the baked in racism, because that's not bias, conscious or unconscious, that's straight up racism, and try and create a system where people can get a fair shake and they don't have to erase themselves from their home just to be able to do that.